Hi, Bjorn Olsson. I'm the Executive Director of the Terrytown Music Hall. Welcome to another of our popular live stream concerts, which we started back in March when we had to shut down to sort of keep the lights on and to introduce you to new and emerging talent, as well as reconnecting with some old familiar faces. The Music Hall is a non-profit organization, and if there was ever a time that you would consider supporting us with a donation or to join us as a member, now is it. If you can be there for us now, we will be here for you for years to come. Thank you. And now please enjoy tonight's live stream concert.
Scrooge awoke in his bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it and his own adjoining sitting room, into which he shuffled in his slippers, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly and mistletoe and ivy reflected back the light as if many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as the petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of a throne were turkeys and geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping around the corner. "Come in! Come in and know me better, man! I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me! You have never seen the like of me before." "Never. Have I never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these late years?" pursued the phantom. I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, Spirit?" "More than 1,800. A tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson, which is working now. So tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told, and he held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door, the spirit smiled, and he stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, brave in ribbons, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. And now the two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. What have you got your precious father then?" said Mrs. Cratchit. "And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha wasn't as late last Christmas by half an hour?" "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother!" cried the two young Cratchits. "Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times, taking off her shawl and bonnet for her. "We had a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and we had to clear away this morning, mother." Well, never mind so long as you're come. said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless ye. No, no, there's father coming, cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide! So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, well, he bore a crutch, and he had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, where's our Martha? Cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. Not coming, said Mrs. Cratchit. Not coming, said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits. Not coming? Upon Christmas Day? Well, Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit, when Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. As good as gold, said Bob, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that people saw him in church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and he trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hardy. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim, before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the two young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, which with they returned soon in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor, and Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everyone, not forgetting themselves, and they mounted guard upon their posts, cramming spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. And at last, the dishes were set on, and grace was said. And it was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. And when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" And there never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Miss Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon a dish, that they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits, in particular, were steeped in sage and onions to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding in and bring it in. Hullo, a great deal of steam, and the pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day, that was the cloth, and a smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other with a laundress next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm and blazing in half a quatrain of like ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck on the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly, too, that he regarded as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. And at last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound of the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, and as Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. And then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side, upon his little stool, and Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and he wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me, if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit. Please, say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit. "Man," said the ghost, if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among the hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and he trembled, cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children. Christmas Day." "Dear, it should be Christmas Day, I'm sure," said she, "for on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do. Poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "Well, I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before. The chestnuts and the jug went round and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, but he sang it very well indeed. And there was nothing of high mark in this. This was not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, Scrooge had his eyes upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. It was a great surprise for Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side. And he said that Christmas was a humbug as I live, cried Scrooge's nephew. He believed it too. More shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece by marriage, indignantly. She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking, capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed. He is a comical old fellow, said Scrooge's nephew. That's the truth. He's not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment. I mean, who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? Well, he didn't lose much of a dinner. Ah, indeed. I think he loses a very good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same. Well, I'm glad to hear it, said Scrooge's nephew, because I haven't got any faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper? Topper clearly had his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast, who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. And after tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family, and they knew what they were about when they sung a glee or a catch, I can assure you. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Ah, here is a new game, said Scrooge. 1/2 hour spirit, only one. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions, yes or no, as the case was. The fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled, yes, and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, lived in London, walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, no, wasn't led by anyone, didn't live in a menagerie, and had never killed in a market, and was not a horse, no, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every new question put to him, the nephew burst out into a fresh roar of laughter. At last, the plump sister cried out, "Ah, I found it out! I know who it is, Fred. I know who it is." "Well, wait, what is it?" cried Fred. "It is your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it certainly was. Admiration was the sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have drank to the unconscious company in an inaudible speech. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. It was a long night, if it were only a night. Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed in the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. "A spirit's lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near." The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment. "Forgive me," said Scrooge, but I see something strange, and not belonging to yourself, protruding from your robe. Is it a foot, or is it a claw?" "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet, and they clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here, look down here," exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish. Scrooge started back appalled. "Spirit! Are they yours?" "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them. "And they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware the boy. For on his brow I see that written, which is doom. Unless the writing be erased, deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Said the spirit, turning to him for the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley and lifted up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him.